People ask me a lot about reincarnation. It's kind of threaded throughout my work in the last 3 or 4 decades, but it hasn't really been something I focused on a lot. And I think really maybe that is because it can really become bells and whistles. I've seen that happen for so many people, some kind of drug to take or some kind of hook to bite that somehow makes now in this present moment less important. And anything that does that for me, I'm not interested in. That being said, I have had very deep, visceral, gut level experiences, flashbacks that I often call them, of past lives. I'm paraphrasing Eleanor Roosevelt. What was it she said about 100 years ago? She was like, I don't think it's any less sort of strange that I show up in another life than the fact of me showing up in this one. But I really started getting deeper into this. Funny enough, not in studies or any of that. It was actually through breath work. When I started really working deeply with breath work in the year 1993, I started with breath work in 89 alone, but it wasn't necessarily for transformation of consciousness breath work in 89 when I was still in high school. It was more like to shift energy, to shift my focus or state of being, activate myself when I felt tired, things like that. And then when I realized, wow, Dale, breath is really the root of everything, I started going deeper into that. And it was in these different breathwork experiences beginning in 1993 that the reincarnation thing really started popping back up for me, because I started going, all right, hold on a second. There's something very real here. And I find it interesting that it took me years, probably about 20, 25 years in my personal work in this world that I'm sharing with people. It took me well over 2 decades of focusing on breath and fire in a lot of ways before I realized, hold on a second, Dale. And I started to have this imagery. I know on a very deep level the power of breath. And I understand, of course, when religion tells you to turn away from something, that means there's probably something there. And I don't want to say all religions, but fire, I've got so many other videos about literally there's no such thing as the fire of hell. There's only the light of God. We create the fire of hell through our resistance of the eternal light. And it's shedding light on those parts of our beings that we're not ready to let come into the light. That great line from the Gospel of Thomas, that which you bring forth from within will save you. That which you do not bring forth from within will destroy you. Or there is nothing concealed which will not ultimately come into the light. And I started going deeper into the breath work, deeper, doing it several times a week for hours at a time. And I started having these really powerful experiences over and over of me as, at first I didn't understand what that cross was, but then I started moving closer into it and deeper into the symbology and realized, wow, Dale, so you were a Cathar. And I've spoken, since this realization happened for me 32 years ago, I have been able to pick out Cathars when I meet them. And I speak a lot about this in my Magdalene courses and audio programs and things. But speaking of busier southern France, I've talked a lot about that in my work. But one of the things that was really powerful to me was when I started digging more into the Cathars, who were basically the holders of the Grail in a lot of ways. They were vegetarian. I'm a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian since I was 17, however long that is. I'm 53, figure it out. I'll be 54 in a few weeks. But that being said, I guess I'm 52. And I'm going to be 53. It doesn't matter after 50. It all smushes together. But I started having this deep kinship that I felt with the Cathars in southern France. And there was a point where the Catholic Church moved in, overseen by Pope Innocent III, who said anyone who should construe a doctrine which runs antecedent to the established doctrines of the Holy Roman Catholic Church must be burned alive in fire without pity. There's different ways that was quoted. I've seen it as several different quotes. Burned alive in fire without pity. Yes, that's Pope Innocent III. And there was a pilgrim, a farmer, who went up to the presiding legate the day before they were going to move in on the stronghold of the Cathars in Béziers in southern France. And he said to the legate, basically the man in command, he said, how are we supposed to know if we're Cathars? And he said, kill them all. God will know will know his own. You've heard that line before. Well, what ended up happening, what's the date by chance? It's July 22nd, the feast day of St. Mary Magdalene, if you want to know why that atonement happened with the Catholic Church. And they moved in the following morning and murdered anywhere between 15 and 25,000 Cathars, depending on where you read the source material. And most of what they did, is everybody breathing, was to rub them in lamp oil, tie them together in piles, and light them on fire while they were still alive. Are you breathing? Children, women, men. They barred the doorways of the churches of St. Magdalene and St. Jude, and they threw what's essentially Molotov cocktails in there, lit them all on fire while they were alive. Well, the flashback I was having in my breath work before I knew about any of that, I didn't know anything about it, was I kept seeing that symbol, that Cathar cross, but I kept having these flashbacks. We're going back 32 years now of me being in fire and being burned alive, which is wild because in my teens, I would have nightmares of being burned alive, and I never understood it. I also had nightmares of me being put into some sort of box under a floor with like a grate over top of it, and people would step over me and do stuff on me, torture me. I was basically shoved down into this little compartment in the floor. Well, I started having these bigger breath experiences and these flashbacks, and I had this deep experience of first trying to burn me alive, and somehow I was still alive, and being drug off and shoved down into a little box in the floor for a period of time. I don't know how long. And then I was still alive. And that's when they pulled me out of the floor. And this I remember so keenly that it still activates every cell in my being. This man, who I know who this person is, and this person has popped up in other versions of my life, literally came up on top of me, laying flat on my back, and put so much weight on my chest that I literally could not breathe. And he literally was pressing down on my ribs enough, and then started to push down on what would be my abdomen so wholly and fully, and lifted himself up with all of his weight until I literally wasn't able to breathe while I'm looking in his eyes. So regardless of whether this actually happened or not, this is something that just kept coming back over and over and over again. And I find it kind of wild that it took me decades before I realized, hey, wow, Dale, nobody else had to say it to me. I kind of got it. It makes a lot of sense why I'm so focused on breath and the true nature of fire versus what we are told it is. That whole idea of hell, which is only 700 years old, which was written in Old Italian, that wasn't even in the Bible, that people seem to think of as hell today. But pay attention. Ride the rise and fall of your breath. Allow yourself to go deeper into the experience of the present moment, because the deeper you can be now, the more awake you can be now, the more these echoes of ancient dreams are going to begin to really come back and shed almost like the essence of their wisdom across the moving sea of your soul. It's amazing how just paying attention has transformed my life. People can say presence, be awake, awakened, enlightened, use whatever word you need to fulfill your egoic desires. It's fine. Just pay attention. It's actually that simple, but really pay attention. Do your best to not add the delusional echoes of thought and concept and BS belief systems on top of your present moment experience. The better you can learn to do that, the deeper you will move into the further awakening of your soul. I love you dearly.